These are the names and faces of trans people who have been murdered globally since 2020. The list contains 13 names. It begins with Ozge Balir, who was murdered in 2020. It ends with Brianna Ghey in February of 2023. Every single one of these people was murdered for being trans. These are the names we know about. That number could very well be much higher. Today we discuss trans lives in the modern world, the DWP Snoopers Charter, and the recent horrific attacks on the safe zone in Gaza. I'm Harvey John. Welcome to the Critical Mass News Review. It's been over 4 months now, since October the 7th, and the Israeli occupation of Gaza has become even more horrific. A little under 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the ICJ recognising that there was plausible evidence that Israel was engaging in a genocide. Since that judgment, we have had an unprecedented letter from over 800 senior civil servants which has warned the government to stop asserting to the public that there is a strategic and defensible rationale behind the Israeli operation and supporting it is in our country's best interests. At the same time, 1,500 EU civil servants warned the EU of their legal obligation to contribute to peace and to protect human rights. Since then, Israel has killed another 2,277 Palestinians. And although there is more talk of a negotiated ceasefire, the Israelis have just refused a Hamas proposal to bring the war to a complete end within 135 days. This week, the IDF targeted Rafah, an area of Gaza containing over 1.7 million Palestinians who'd fled the terror and destruction being done elsewhere. So far, at least 95 civilians have been killed in what Amnesty International has called unlawful strikes. Rafah has been designated a safe area by Israel. And now that they've got all their eggs into one basket, they're letting the foxes in to kill off every last Palestinian. Though by now, it's evident that Israel has little regard for the law and believes they can hide behind lies and propaganda, such as that which appeared at last Sunday's Super Bowl, American football's largest event of the year. The attacks on Rafah recently have been more than just unprovoked, but a new low for criminal and monstrous behaviour by Netanyahu and his supporters. Bombing a refugee camp, a camp located in an area of Gaza where they have told innocent civilians to flee, is beyond abhorrent. 70 people were killed in that first attack, half of them children. Since when is a child who is suffering from malnutrition, impoverished, barely strong enough to throw a rock, let alone fire a missile, a threat to a country that ranks as one of the top 25 military powers on the planet? Take the life of young Hind Rajib, a 6-year-old girl calling for help as IDF soldiers murdered her family. Did she attack Israel? Did she murder and kill in the name of justice or freedom? Listen to her final moments and tell me, did she deserve to die?
أجي أخذك حبيبتي طيب ما أنا يا حبيبتي رح أجي أخذك هلا عمو من الهلال عماله عم بنصك عشان إحنا نقدر نيجي ناخذك حواليكي في ضرب رصاص يا حبيبتي والله.
These moments are all too common to us now. It has become impossible to fathom that there is a single Gazan child who has not experienced tragedy in the wake of these brutal attacks. And yet, Rishi Sunak continues to do nothing. Keir Starmer does nothing. Concocted differences aside, Israel is just one more example where there is tissue paper between the positions of Tories and Labour. It's not just the people, but their houses and their culture. At the start of the war, Palestinians were told to flee south to Rafah and Khan Yunis. However, on 11th of October, the Rafah Museum was completely destroyed by an airstrike. Since then, museums, libraries, universities, cultural centres and bookshops have all been completely destroyed. In a further sign of just how Palestine has turned the Labour Party inside out, Labour's candidate for the Rochdale by-election, Azhar Ali, has been told that he can no longer be Labour's candidate. Coming just a week before the by-election, this is an amazing move by a party that really wants to build momentum in an election year. The withdrawal means that although Ali will be listed on the ballot papers as their Labour candidate, he cannot campaign under Labour's banner. This has happened because he reportedly said that Israel had allowed the October 7th attack to happen. Strangely enough, the New York Times gained access to an internal military assessment 9 days after the Hamas attack. This revealed that the intelligence sources knew that a major attack was being planned, but they chose to do nothing about it. Now, whether this was deliberate or otherwise remains speculation, but reports in Israeli newspapers at that time were certainly critical of Netanyahu for allowing the attack. There was little doubt at the time that the Israeli public felt the attack could have been stopped. Azhar Ali had plenty of supporters inside Labour, including Louise Ellman, but once the Zionist lobby demanded his removal, this was only ever going to end one way. The effect of the dropping of their candidate will be that a by-election, which should have been an easy win for Labour, is now likely to be won by one-time Labour MP George Galloway. Brianna Ghey was an out and proud trans girl who was brutally murdered in February of last year. Her murderers were caught and sentenced little under a month ago to serve sentences of 20 years minimum each. 2 decades from now, when they are released, I wonder if things will have improved. If our head of state is any indicator, I would say the next 20 years is going to be a tough uphill battle for trans rights. In the House of Commons, Rishi Sunak made yet another transphobic jibe, which was responded to with outrage by Keir Starmer, though the leader of the opposition is more than a bit of a hypocrite. Here's the clip of the moment.
But it's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, to hear about promises from someone who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, I think I counted almost 30 in the last year. Pensions, planning, peerages, public sector pay, tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman. Although in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn. The list goes on, but the theme is the same, Mr. Speaker. It's empty words, broken promises, and absolutely no plan. Keir Starmer.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame.
The comment made by Sunak is in direct reference to a quote from Keir Starmer in an interview with the Sunday Times, in which Starmer described the definition of a woman as biological and not having a penis. It's hardly the first time Starmer's been an enemy to trans rights. When the Scottish Gender Reform Bill was brought to the floor, Starmer made sure his MPs abstained, allowing the Tories to block self-ID in Scotland. The trans community seems to have few allies in the House of Commons, a community which comedian Daniel Sloss noted sarcastically, has had it too easy for too long. Seems you can't turn 3 channels without finding some anti-trans content. In the UK, the anti-trans movement is especially strong. It is in fact estimated by Pink News that the Daily Mail produces a minimum of up to 5 anti-trans stories per week. Many of these articles have been aimed at the protection of so-called single-sex spaces for women. It's not just the Daily Mail either. Former Guardian columnist Suzanne Moore, now of The Telegraph, is trading on anti-trans rhetoric. Even left favourite George Galloway has engaged in anti-trans dog whistles, referring to trans mania and arguing that children should not be taught that there are 99 genders. Transphobia is an ever-present issue in British society, and one that is still often heard in common conversations, with Stop Hate UK noting that trans individuals are more likely to experience hate crimes than any other LGBTQIA+ members, some of that coming from other groups within their own community. It is important that we recognise the rights and give the respect to trans individuals, that we encourage a change in attitudes. In 20 years' time, when Brianna's killers come out from prison, We can either have made strides towards protecting and accepting trans individuals, or we can let a 15-year-old girl have died and have no change happen at all. When you look at your bank statement, you probably believe that its contents are private, a communication between you and your bank. That may never have been entirely true, but new legislation going through Parliament will mean that in future it certainly won't be. An amendment to the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill now gives the DWP the right of access to people who are on benefits. In the Commons, Stephen Timms, the Labour MP for East Ham, raised the following point from the Child Poverty Action Group.
The Child Poverty Action Group put this to us, and I think this sums up what a lot of people feel. I quote, "It shouldn't be that people have fewer rights, including to privacy, than everyone else in the UK simply because they are on benefits."
Timms went on to support this point by quoting Annabel Denham of The Telegraph and Spectator.
Annabel Denham, Deputy Comment Editor at the Daily Telegraph, warned in The Spectator of this measure handing, and I quote, authorities the power to snoop on people's bank accounts.
Most MPs and all newspapers agree on one thing. Benefit fraud is wrong. Most voters tend to agree with that too. But what is the scale of benefit fraud, and is it necessary to allow the DWP unfettered access to our bank accounts to deal with it? We should also bear in mind here that when they talk about people in receipt of state benefits, it includes those claiming a state pension, currently around 12.3 million people. It also includes those who claim or who have claimed at any time child benefit, currently 7.4 million people. That's almost 20 million people who have done nothing to fall under suspicion that the government wants on the ability to snoop on. Add to that the 5.6 million on universal credit, and you start to understand why this bill is being described as the Snoopers Charter. You might expect that, given the effect on your personal financial data, this would be an area where Labour would be behind our civil liberties. Well, this is Chris Bryant, MP for the Rhondda.
So let me be absolutely clear. Labour will pursue the fraudsters, the conmen, the claimants who try to take money from the public purse fraudulently or illegally, and that includes those who have defrauded the taxpayer over PPE contracts or have not declared their full income to HMRC.
Rather than take on the view that every benefit claimant is a potential fraudster, he simply repeats the worn-out cliché about fraudsters. Labour did not vote against the bill. In what has become their usual approach to contentious issues, neither did they vote for it. Yet another issue on which Labour is happy to let Tory legislation pass, with no suggestion that they will abolish it once in power. That's it for this episode of the Critical Mass News Review. Don't forget to look out for the Sunday Socialist International Women's Day edition out next weekend. Written by women, but essential reading for all genders. Until next time, this is Harvey John, signing off.